Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to Quilt Along number 5 on the Free Motion Quilting Project. This week we're moving right along with this little sawtooth star quilt. And this is a cheater cloth quilt that I started last week, and we practiced stitching on a line in free motion. This week I'm going to take it up another notch and fill in the sawtooth star blocks with stippling. Now I'm using a 1/4 of an inch scale for these blocks, and I like that scale simply because it draws attention to the star shape. I wanted that to really stand out on the surface of my quilt. I figure, hey, if I take the time to piece something like that, I really should get credit for it and not just stitch all over it. Of course, there are some lines that I ignored, some piecing lines that I just totally ignored in the creation of this quilt. And I'd like to share more about that in this video today. Another thing I showed you is how to stitch around a marked motif. Within the star block, I drew just a very simple motif and played with stitching around that with the same scale stippling, and also a little bit in the center too. It's really nice to be able to develop an ability to stitch around things, whether they're obstacles, whether they're marked lines on your quilt. No matter what it is, you should have an ability to stitch around that and still not stitch yourself into a corner or get lost within the design. As with all forms of stippling, I always stitch in a row, no matter whether I'm stitching in a small area or around a shape. I'm always generally filling in a very logical progression, and I think that this will help you be able to fill your quilts as well. Now, as far as the scale goes, it's a really good idea to play with many different scales on your quilt. Play with stitching this 1/4 of an inch scale in a block and see how that feels. Play with stitching that in a bigger scale as well and see how you like that. Everybody has a different scale, a different comfort zone when it comes to their quilts, and it's important to develop your own style. There is no wrong way or no right way to quilt a quilt. Keep that in mind. It is your creation, and it should be whatever you want it to be. So let's watch the video today and see how this works in free motion. Let's get started stippling, and the first thing I want to point out is I have had to speed up the video a little bit in order to show you everything I want to show in this video. So it is a little faster. And then the first thing I want you to notice is where I'm starting in this block. I'm starting in that upper point of the star, and I'm working from left to right and basically in a row. And notice how every time I come to a point, I leave enough room. I wiggle in and then wiggle back out with enough room so that I don't get trapped in one of the points. You can see that right there. I just kind of wiggle in and wiggle my way back out. And this is important because when you're stitching something like a star, it is very easy to just kind of forget, and especially when you're stitching randomly, to fill in, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh well, there's a big gaping open area and I have to break thread or travel into there and fill it up. And it's much easier if you're filling kind of logically, going into a point, coming back out of it, and filling the entire space as you go. Now I'm working back, and notice it's another row. I'm just filling the block with a row going one way, then a row going the other way, always logically moving the quilt from left to right or right to left. And I find this very easy and also very quick when it comes to filling blocks. If you look back at any of the videos from the 365 designs, they're pretty much filled in about the same way, working in these rows. And this works great when you're working on a real quilt, the blocks of a real quilt. You don't have to quilt from the center when it comes to a block, especially if you've stitched it in the ditch. It's already pretty much stable, so you can quilt it however you want, whether that's starting on one of the edges, whether that's starting in the middle. It's wherever you want to go and however you want to fill it. So you can fill your block really any way you want to. The best advice that I have is just to simply fill it in a logical progression. Try it in many different ways first. Try it randomly, stitching in all different directions as you go. Then try it in rows. See which way works best for you. Everybody is going to approach this a little differently simply because we're all different people and our brains work in different ways. This is the way that works best for me simply because it's very logical and I always know where I'm stitching next and how I'm going to get there. Now I want to show you how to fill the center of this marked motif. I have to shrink the stippling down a little bit so that way it fits and fills the area nicely. Understand that I don't necessarily have to fill this space. I could have left it empty and open and that would have looked just fine too. Now I'm going to fill the space between the star and the marked design. And I'm doing this just the exact same way that I've filled the empty star. And that is coming down with a wiggly set of stippling, basically in a row, filling between the star and the marked design. I'm trying to fill the entire space as I go, not just a section of it. I'm trying not to leave any open gaps, such as, if I went on ahead and wiggled down and left that whole point open, I'd have to just find a way to wiggle back in there later and finish it. So I'm trying to fill and finish off each point as I go around. And I'm working from let's see, counterclockwise here. You don't necessarily have to work in the same direction. Kind of play with that too. Which feels most natural for you? Working counterclockwise or clockwise? Play with that. Play with all of these ideas and see what is the most natural feeling. If you feel like you're struggling with it, try something else. See if there's another way or another pattern that works better for you. Now, all of these blocks are being quilted with a 1/4 of an inch scale. That's fairly dense stippling. And I think that scale is something that we need to experiment with and play with. A lot of quilters are turned off by dense stitching like this simply because they feel like it's too dense for a bed quilt. I think that the one place that you can play with dense stitching on a bed quilt is the blocks because they're fairly small and they're usually in the center of your quilt. So that area, it's just going to be in the center of the bed. It doesn't matter if they're a little denser than the sashing or the borders. I think it's something to experiment with and just play with. Having it stitched on a slightly denser scale means that the blocks are going to show up a little bit better. You get a little bit more credit for it. It also isn't going to be super time consuming. I'm not going to have hours and hours and hours of stitching simply because the blocks are fairly small. So they're a small space that you can fill on a small scale and it'll end up looking great. Like I said, it's something to play with and experiment with and see what you like best on your quilts. Now I'm going to come up and around and fill this last corner in and just try and fill that space as consistently as I can, and then I'm going to finish up my threads by hitting that marked motif. Again, it's however you want to stitch it and play with the design. So that's it for this week. You might be wanting to try just the Sawtooth Star block as your practice this week. In the post that I'm going to write, you'll be able to find a downloadable marked drawing of the Sawtooth Star that you can mark on practice fabric or just simply practice drawing. Play with filling it in a 1/4 inch scale and a 1/2 inch scale and see which one you like best. If you also want to try stitching around a marked pattern, that's a good idea too, and I've included that as a worksheet as well. Of course, if you're going to stitch around a marked pattern within the star, you're going to need to stitch on a slightly smaller scale so that way everything fits. I hope all of that makes sense. Make sure to link up your blog post to this week's post and share your progress with stitching on a line. I'm really enjoying seeing your progress each week, and it's very fun to be able to plan my posts off of the things that you're needing and wanting to see. So until next time, let's go quilt. Make stippling much easier to master on your home sewing machine. Invest in the 3 best tools for free motion quilting: the Supreme Slider, Machinigers quilting gloves, and Little Genie magic bobbin washers. Find all 3 in the Ultimate Quilting Kit at daystyledesigns.com.